Now this seems transformational. This obviously seems like something that could completely transform a business and be able to take it to the next level. You've been on record comparing Palantir's potential trajectory of growth to another company that has made shareholders a lot of return on their capital, which is Amazon and their AWS product.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
want to
yeah.
I want to give you some time to kind of explain what do you see as the similarity between an AWS and an AIP slash Foundry that could result in that crazy amounts of billions of revenue with 80% margins per year over the next couple decades.
Well, I think a lot of people, like if you take AWS for example, and granted, I was probably barely out of diapers. No, I'm just kidding. I was probably just out of middle school, going into high school when AWS was really starting getting kicked off. I think it was 2006 timeframe, so I was just like a freshman in high school, I believe. And so I remember hearing rumblings about it, probably not 2006, but definitely when I was in high school going into college about AWS. And I think a lot of people were like, well, why would I need to run anything off AWS? I could just make it myself. And I don't think people fully understood the impact of cloud computing and things of the like at that point in particular. And so then you started to slowly see that transformation of people going from pure desktop and keeping everything at home, multiple hard drives. Oh, my hard drive died. I need to go to the store, Micro Center or whatever, and get a backup external hard drive so I can unplug it and I don't get viruses, what have you. So I think people started to truly understand the capability of running websites and running things off of AWS and started to truly kickstart that sort of growth. But I don't think in 2000s or even 2005 or probably even through 2010, people realized that that was something that they would need, right? And it was something that was there 5, 10 years ahead of when people actually thought that they needed it. And we've seen
Right.
how great of a trajectory that AWS has had, and now people use it more and more every day, and it's truly revolutionized how we do business, globally, for multitude of different companies using it. Like literally it's a global piece of infrastructure that I don't think people even knew we needed 15 years ago. So people were probably like, well, I can make my website, I know HTML, I can create it, and I can store all that in a server in my house, and it's not going to be that big of a deal, to the point where we are today, where it's you just work with AWS and pay for it as you go and the usage that you need. And it's kind of a genius sort of strategy. I think it's the same thing. People are like, well, I have Microsoft Teams, like, or I have Microsoft operating system. Like, why do I need a different operating system to store my data, use my data, use data analytics? There's Power BI, there's Spotfire, there's a bunch of different you know things that you can use to kind of get it. And it's like, well, I don't think like those are tools that have been patched to work off of the old mindset, right? So just like I was talking about with my analogy of getting the cobwebs off of 100-year-old processes, we've been using these Microsoft OS sort of processes now for 20 years, 20, 30 years now. And it's like, there has to be a better way. If you invent it from the ground up, what would you do? And it might not necessarily be important for everybody, but if you're a data run or data physical organization where the data is truly going to impact the day-to-day decisions that you have, you're not like I can't say that because I feel like that's still, I was gonna say, you're not a customer service related industry. It's like customer service is still important because there's data points on customers that you need to gather every day to make sure that their feelings are, or not feelings, but their needs are met, or their feelings, I guess, are met in appropriate manner. But it's putting data first in a way that it hasn't been done on a Microsoft or um, Apple operating system, iOS. And it's the same thing if you think about it. Maybe this is a good example. If you were to be doing video editing, making music, what operating system would you use? Would you use a Mac or would you use a Windows?
Most people would use a Mac.
So if you're focusing on data,
Right.
I think that you're probably going to make the correlation of people don't know it yet, but you'll probably want to use something like a Foundry or a Gotham. And so it's just a different way. It's not to say it's the right way, right? If you were to use video games or like, hey, I'm going to play Diablo, you wouldn't open up a Foundry instance to play Diablo, or play Call of Duty, or you'd probably get on a Microsoft, operating system or a Windows computer and just play, right? So
Right.
I think that it's not to say it's the right answer for everybody, but I think it's what people don't realize they need yet. And it's something that I think we've patched over time, which is using a Microsoft operating system, which is meant to be used for everybody, right? Anybody can open it up. They can use calculator, or they can play video games, or they can go on the internet, and so that's not the use of a Palantir Foundry instance, at least not yet. Maybe they come up with the consumer things where you play internet or play video games on a Palantir sort of software. I don't see it as of yet, but this is something that is specifically focused on making enterprises the most efficient that they can be, focused around data and decision making. And
Why is that comparable to an AWS over the long term? Why do you think? Because AWS is cloud computing, you need to host your
for
data
sure,
somewhere.
it's apples and oranges. For sure, it's a comparison, but the growth aspect is not, right? So
Mm.
I think the thing where maybe people are like, AWS and Foundry are completely different. It's like, I understand that the products themselves are completely different. They do have both cloud aspects to them, but that's not the comparison I'm trying to make. The comparison I'm trying to make is the growth trajectory for the organizations themselves. I think a lot of people don't understand what AWS was back then, and it got to $1 billion, $2 billion worth of revenue within 5-6 years, and then it took off to the point where I think it's making $80 billion a year in revenue. And I'm trying to compare that to what Palantir really is. People are just coming into Palantir is really only a 5-6 year. Sorry, Foundry and Gotham are really only a 5-6 year journey of actually trying to physically sell to the commercial customer. They've been honing in on their strategy over the past 20 years. They've been around since 2003, but they were focused on making themselves invaluable to the government and things of the like. And once they really finally, I guess, turned over the leaf and said, you know what, I think we have the product that we need to go to commercial, then they started it. And I think it's been slow, but uh, to get to that point. But now that I think you've gotten there over the past 6 years, going from, I forget what they went public at, but I think it was less than like $1 billion in revenue, to go from
Yeah,
a billion to
about 800
to
million, something like that. Yeah.
yeah, something. So that was just when they went public in 2020. So yeah, I mean, it's starting to go pretty quick if you think about it in that perspective. Like, I was just doing some analysis of how quickly their revenue was growing, and I think in like 2018, 2019, they were still in $200 million revenue quarters.
Yeah.
And so the fact that now we're talking about getting to $600 million revenue quarters and growing, uh, and releasing new products that, I think that's the other piece is AIP is probably the first of many products that will continue to release. If you think and you look at those presentations that they've had, they had the one for Gotham that they started at kind of 2016 or 2017, and they have all the additional capabilities that they've added to Gotham since then. They had Foundry, which was kind of like 2018 or 2019, and all the capabilities they've had since then. They had Apollo, which started in 2020 or 2021. All the capabilities they've added since then. They are just releasing AIP, which is just at the moment what it is today, and who knows what capabilities they're going to be adding. The thing that's beautiful is that a lot of times all these different applications talk well with each other. And that's something that I think people don't acknowledge. It's like Foundry, it's like you have all these applications. All these applications are based off of an operating system of data that you have that are all kind of intercommunicated. And then same thing with Apollo. Apollo's helping deploy specific versions of software or rights to people within an organization. I think that that's genius as well. And the fact that, you kind of have it on a web instance like Google Chrome, it allows you to kind of do it without needing to, I guess, having to restart a computer or anything like that, right? Because it's kind of uploaded and done through an instance on Google Chrome, rather than, you're not opening up a Palantir laptop like you do like a Windows, right? You open
Right.
up a Windows laptop and enter an instance on Google Chrome. And so that means it's kind of all uploaded through the internet, which is pretty interesting. And you can kind of take that kind of wherever you need to be. Anyway.
So I know you work in the commercial sector with the
Yeah,
software. I want to get your high level overview because you mentioned it as an investor and
yeah.
how you analyze the government business. They just got $100 million in 3 contracts, sole sourced, meaning there was no competition for those contracts. How big do you think the government business can be with defense spending, defense budgets in the United States growing every year? And is that a part of the business that gets you excited as an investor ultimately?
Well, I think the TAM of looking specifically total addressable market. I mean, looking specifically only at the U.S. market is underselling the government business. But I'd say I could easily see within the next 10, 20 years it getting to, you know, I don't know, it's $1 billion ish now. I could easily say getting it to 8 to 10 billion just for the US,
Right.
which would probably be close to today's budget. Of course, it'll probably grow, but I could easily say getting to about a 1% or more share of that total spend. And I'm sure if you looked at what um, Microsoft gets, it's probably way more than even that. So um, yeah, it's just my thoughts there.
Yeah.
But I think that you're underselling potentially the. We've seen the contracts come through the UK as well, and obviously the Ukraine deal that's going on with rebuilding Ukraine and how they're going to use that. And so I think 8 to 10 billion is probably where I'd say the U.S. government business. I'm not 100%. I'll just be blank and caveat that, or sorry, blunt, as you know, I like to say, and caveat that with I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it gets to 1%.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, look, if we think defense spending is growing, especially internationally, we see, from a philosophical sense, the whole deglobalization of society, Russia, what's going on, potentially China, Taiwan. It makes sense to imagine that more institutions would want to at least have software, even if nothing's going wrong, just in case something does go wrong. Then Palantir will be first on the list.